Thank you for having me here. It's very nice to be able to talk here about some of the ideas we have. This is from this is an overview. I'm working in AI partly, but I'm also sometimes a bit in philosophy. And in AI we do causal modeling already a long time, but in previous times it was a bit more primitive and now it's more advanced. And I will tell you about that first, and then later I will come to the concept of causality reification. And then after, in the second half of the talk, I will put it more in the context of different philosophies about representations. And I end with the idea of self-conscious and self-explaining AI. Okay, yes, as I said, in early history, causal modeling in AI was just static causal graphs, and then they could do some diagnosis, for example, on that. Later on, they came with node activations of such a graph that were dynamic, with activation values. And recently, we added reification of causality for such networks and based a self-modeling network modeling approach on that can run such things. So we have done a number of applications of that already. And one of them is, for example, the case study that I will show as first one. So first the causality reification principle for our mind. Later on I will show also options for it, not only for the mind. The case study is with a colleague from psychiatry, Gerrit Glas. He did a lifetime of being a therapist in different contexts, but he was also a full professor at my university part-time. So I found him, and we just were looking at this type of things to see how that works in therapeutical situation. He has a lot of publications and also a book about his human-centered types of therapists, where he explains his idea. Well, in this case, for this case study, he provided such a case study which has a realistic background. And then the idea is that within a therapy, you try to get people first familiar with their own personal characteristics, to let them know themselves a bit better, becoming aware of some important aspects of them, and being able to interpret one's behavior in relations to those aspects. And finally, based on such insights, the idea is that the therapy would lead to being able to manage oneself more effectively. So that's the case study that we started with. So the idea of his writings was already that he has a kind of 4-level architecture in mind, where you have the base level mental process, then you have a level of self-referencing, a level of self-awareness, and a level of self-interpretation. So we try to follow these as well as possible. So this was the idea of the model that came out. So first, this is not yet the model itself, but just a kind of, yeah? Okay. So this is just an example. Am I now in the way for you? You see, this is a base network, and it is not yet a case study. But for example, in this case, the states X3 and X5, they have some causal relation. So X3 has an influence on activation of X5. And then the self-modeling idea is that you make a kind of small picture of the network inside the network itself. So the part of the network structure is this connection from X3 to X5, plus how strong it is. And W, the W of it is the state that represents the weight, the connection weight, the number, the value of that. So that is things that we can use. And so this is then the first level of self-representation. There are causality strengths, but there are also the knowledge about causality strengths, and this knowledge about how you relate yourself do that. So that's the idea. I myself have a strong impulse to do this when this happens. And that's what he calls self-referencing representations. So the next level is about self-awareness, because having self-representations is not automatically needed to be aware. And then we have self-awareness states, and if you look well, then you see dashed bi-directional arrows between them. That means we used the idea of the winner-takes-it-all principle, which is also playing a role in some of the well-known theories on consciousness. So that means that one of them wins that in competition with the others. So then we have the idea of making certain states more accessible, more excitable, and that you can do that by thresholds, and that's represented in those states. And there's a kind of intervention there. I will not tell the whole story, that will be too much detail. So in the highest level, we have some focus state. Actually, it was also in the next higher level. That means that we include some form of attention. By focusing in the therapy on certain things, you make more attention, and attention is, like in the theory of Graziano, one of the elements that can play a role in consciousness as well. So that's the highest level. There the person is trying to interpret him or herself and to find out what is not so practical what I'm doing. Maybe I can change some things. And that can be going downward with the long pink loop downward. So this is a bit of the idea. I will not go into too much details. I will now focus on more bringing it in the context of the ideas about representation. And I will go through these types of things that I mention here. One first thing that may not for everybody be related to representation, but still can be seen as that, is the idea of dynamical systems as state-determined systems. That means that the current state is determining the future behavior. So in that sense, if you say it explicitly like that, it can be viewed as a form of representation of the future. Esby has written some interesting thing about that too. He said that usually you are looking for concepts that make your system state determined as a researcher. So I found that interesting, but he doesn't do much more than just this remark with it. But later I try to find out what is really behind this, and if researchers just are looking for it, is that meaning that they are in the world as well? So that's the next question related to this. So state determinedness has a kind of asymmetric position in time because it relates to current and future, but not the past. And so there are also the ideas, of course, that the past plays an important role in the same way, more or less, like Laplace, that is really a symmetric formulation, actually. And also the interactivist representation, one of the earliest works of Mark Bickhardt, was also talking about the past, and that relates to the current state, and that has effect on the future. So that's also someone who put both sides already in one picture. So a number of years ago, I tried to formalize that in the term temporal factorization, and I will explain it in a bit more detail now. Suppose that you have part of the world where the past determines the future. And so this part of the world is assumed deterministic. The rest may not be deterministic, but may as well be deterministic. And so you have some kind of causal effect of past patterns on future patterns. Then temporal factorization says, well, it should go to the present. So break it up and put the present state in between. And that's what I call a mediating state. It mediates between past and future and is there in the current, in the present. So that is some form of world structure. It's a world state, but it's a form of structure in the world that is there. That is kind of transfer possibility from past to future. So you can see this as the left-hand side is a causal relationship from past to present. The right-hand side is a causal relationship from present to future. And you can also say that this is a form of representation relation from the past and the other one to the future. So like some of my previous mentioned people also suggested. So that's the idea then. This is an example that I sometimes use to explain it. That's the river metaphor. Suppose that you have a river with some flow of water, but of course that depends on also other things that have been there in the past, like erosion. So there is a past pattern of erosion and after that a future pattern of the river flow. And of course we know what is in between is the riverbed. So the temporal factorization is just the riverbed as mediating world state. So that means this temporal factorization principle may work in the brain. One of the other options as examples is like delayed response behavior. If you see that, it can relate to, there should be some memory state in between. Past things have influence on how you behave later, even if you don't see it. And that was like 100 years ago a research area for animal behavior people. So that's the idea of temporal factorization. In 2013, Peter Tse came with his book, where also free will was in the title, which was maybe not a good idea because it attracted a lot of maybe wrong attention, because there are still in this book quite interesting things, even if people criticized him about free will, which is in general a bit easy maybe to do that. But the idea of his concept is criterial causation, which is actually an example of temporal factorization, which I also will show. So his idea that there is some kind of changes in the neuronal circuit based on the preceding processing, and those define some type of criteria that are on the one hand physical, but also have some content as information. Because that gives the information not only about the past, what happened, but also about the future when activation will happen. So that's actually just an example. This is his formulation. Is an example of also such a kind of intermediate state between past and future and some representational content of it. So this is then a past representation relation, and this is then his future representation relation. And it's clear that it maps quite well on the idea of temporal factorization. I wished he would have referred to me, but probably he didn't read it. So that's a pity. Let's now look at the causality reification, because that was one of the main concepts of today. And temporal factorization in general postulates states in the present mediating between past and future. Causality reification states can serve as one specific type of that, where you have the same type of mediation. So we will now move a bit more from the mind to the world. It's possible that not only in the mind, but also in nature, this principle can be found, and where you have causality reification. So let's check it here. This example fits well also in Peter Tse's perspective, at least the lower part of it. Suppose you have you look at activations of neurons, and there is some dynamics of synapse strengths, learning say. Then there are world states. These are structures in the brain that make this mediation. So this mediating world state is actually the criteria that Peter Tse defines as representation. But you can also add one level on top of that, because there exists also something like metaplasticity, which controls the amount of the extent of plasticity. And then you have a world state where there is the mediating. state for. So you see that there are states, structures in the world, states that concern structures that are created in certain ways that play this role as mediating states and create levels here in this case, for example. So levels is also what Birch and Bechtel from philosophy of biology describe. There is the area of mechanistic explanation that is often seen as opposed to causal explanation, which is not completely true, I think. But they have found that in biology often mechanisms that you look are not producing anything, they're just control mechanisms, and often even multiple levels. So that's recently they came out with such ideas, and that was also very interesting in relation to what I was doing. And so I have a case study 2 here for the few minutes that I still have. The idea is that there can be some circumstances, childhood neglect, for example, that makes your epigenetic things different, by which the expression of the genes is changing, like from low or to high or from high to low. And that disturbs your normal functioning. And that results often in many mental disorders. And these are the green ones that are finished, and the other ones are still working on. We use also these types of things as case studies. And Nick, 2023, is a very nice paper about it. He shows that disorders in general, they relate to such type of patterns of history. And his second idea by it is that self-control is often the thing that is disturbed if things are disturbed in mental disorders. So also here we have a lot of control levels, and in this case, we follow in biology, of course, you already have a long time that you have the DNA gene expression. They create mRNA that controls the enzyme production, and enzyme controls the physiological development. So those 4 levels we could just already take over. We added the epigenetic level on top of it, and we also added downward a level to distinguish mental processes from the brain structure. So what happens here is also they influence each other, all these processes, dynamics, you have those relations. And then you also have structures. So there are all kinds of structures that make these things happening. These are all mediating world states between those processes. So this is one of the models that we created for it as a self-modeling network model, where we could model this in detail, at least to a certain extent, because it was also abstracted a bit. So that's then we already have an example of many levels, many orders of self-modeling. So there are 2 ideas that have some relation to this. There is the frozen metabolic accident principle for evolution that says if there is some complex structure developed in evolution, then it's difficult to put it away, because it should be replaced by something which can take a lot of time to develop it again. So that means that many interesting and complex things, they are frozen, and the thing is that they are only controlled instead of that they are modified. And that automatically leads to a kind of stacked structure. Another thing is the idea of metabolism first principle that says, well, the origin of life comes from metabolism, then they start to control it in a simple way, the control becomes more complex, it became more control, and so on. Well, the ideas that I present today fit also well to that, I think. There is one thing that I can just mention here. This is a very sad situation. Albert Hofstadter, who actually was the uncle from Douglas Hofstadter that we may know, had a very interesting paper in the Journal of Philosophy. Only 3 citations. I will cite him now. I will be 25 of his citations. It's also a pity. But I think his topic is a bit yeah, people are often criticizing that. It's similar to the idea of the world of idea of Plato, that there is some abstract structures are there, actually nowhere, but they're not in the world, and that's the criticism then often. But this fits quite well here, because what happens here, what we do, we have a kind of world of potential causality ideas, say like the causal diagrams that you can imagine. And what evolution does, evolution is just a very intensive process of searching and finding things. They generate all possibilities, and sometimes they find some of the ideas of this, what I would call causality ideas. So that's another way to see it. And one last remark is the idea context-free versus context-dense. Physics started with the idea that you need empty space to just have laws doing things for you. But we work often in dense context. Our brain is dense, many biological things are dense. So from physics, from that time, that would be only disturbing. But what you really see here is the dense context is used for the evolution to create more and more things, to create extra causality in the world. And the causality is not in the laws, the causality is in the world structure. So that was then the insight that you can keep from this. Okay, last remark. Of course, for the future, we are looking for self-conscious and self-explaining AIs based on such ideas. And maybe in another time I can present some new things about that. If you are interested in joining me in this work, I am very easy in collaboration and do it often. So if you think about a case study, for example, you can always contact me. In next year or after next year, we'll try to get a book out of it. Okay, thanks.